There's a lot of things you try to replace your previous addiction with. It was kind of uncontrollable.
It was difficult.
Uncontrollable. I did a lot of stupid
It
stuff.
was difficult.
I did a lot of stupid stuff.
You don't feel anything. You don't feel anything. You don't feel anything.
Time heals all wounds, but is time really the only thing helping people move on? Our team endeavored to find out. For our research, we chose to look at 4 traumatic events: failing a test, losing a job, going through a breakup, and losing a loved one. Now, with most of our respondents having at least 18 years of life experience, the chances of at least one of these happening to them is very high. While the traumatic event itself is important, our research aims at what students do afterwards to restore a sense of normality in a stressful situation. But before we made any of our own assumptions, we looked at what the current research had to say. Existing literature suggests that the coping process is largely individual, comprised of both personal and situational factors. A study on sadness and consumption concluded that traumatic events, such as irrevocable loss, cause students to feel helpless. Now, when students feel helpless, they turn to consumption as a means to regain control over the situation. This lends itself perfectly to Cushman's theory of the empty self. An internal void causes people to turn to consumption as a means to fill that void. The fact that the void is never actually filled relates to the perpetuating quality, that is, the theory of the empty self. Another interesting point made in the literature is the idea of ego protection. This is when respondents take actions both before and after the event to lessen the impacts. Now, many respondents turn to distraction tactics as a means of just getting on with everyday life. Consumption comes into play when these distraction tactics are related to physically obtaining products or paying for experiences. During a distressing time, people continue to pay a lot of attention to how others perceive them. The products we buy and the things we do communicate a great deal to the world around us. In another study pertaining to shopping and stress relief, respondents, both male and female, turned to retail therapy to cope with a stressful situation. The research concluded that the average price to repair a mood was almost $60. And what's even more interesting is the fact that 82% of these people reported being happy and fully satisfied with their purchase decisions. Retail therapy is just one of the infinite numbers of outlets that people can use to cope with a stressful situation. Our research intends to uncover other outlets that students choose to employ in the coping process. Based on our own thoughts as well as existing research, we made a few assumptions as to what we'd find in our research. Our hypothesis is as follows. We expected to find patterns between respondents' answers, as well as that gender differences would play a big role in the consumption habits of our respondents. Students don't have a lot of money, so we thought that their restricted budgets might also play a role in the way they spend their money. And we also expected that looking back on the event after some time, students would be remorseful in the way that they spent their money after a traumatic event. We obtained our results via 65 hard copy surveys and 7 in-depth interviews. The interview structure began similarly for all of our respondents, but followed the course of the conversation. The questions that were asked were largely dependent on the individual situation. As a basic outline, we asked people to describe the traumatic event and the emotions they remembered feeling at the time. Then we asked them what they did to cope with the event, and finally, how they felt looking back on the situation years later. Muriel is a third-year industrial design student at Carleton University. She tells us about the competitive nature of her small program and how important it is to get good grades on all of your projects. Now, in this interview, she recounts her experience in getting a bad grade on a summative project. Here's what she had to say.
At first I was like keeping it to myself, but then a lot of people like to pry in, and it's just like that program where it's like very like competitive, very small, so we just kind of like ream each other for it, and we're like, oh, okay, well, you know, and they just don't even say anything bad. It's just like, oh, okay. It kind of made me feel bad because like I wanted to keep my own mark to myself, whether it was a better mark or a worse mark. Like even like in total, like all of them tend to just be very judgmental between marks. So it makes you kind of feel a bit like did I do okay? Even though it might have been a higher mark, it wasn't as great as like your peers. So they might be like, oh, she didn't get a good mark. It made me feel like really bad about myself. Yes, I would either like to go out or I'd go out to buy clothing or shoes or anything. Realistically, I'm a shopper. I'd say clothing because it's just like easy to get to. Like I definitely just recently went to the store because I was feeling stressed and I found like this jacket for like $200. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna buy it. And then I was like at the cashier and I'm like, oh, that shirt looks good too. I'm just gonna grab it. Didn't even try it on. Oh, okay, whatever. So I feel great after I buy it, but then when I look at my bank account, I'm like, I probably shouldn't have bought that. It's not a good choice in my life.
But it helps you get over the stressful situation, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Sometimes I'd like to go shopping more so when I'm stressed out, more like a stress release. But if I'm usually like failing something, I want to like go out and like have like fun and like with my friends or like go drinking and whatnot. And then yeah, like some days like I do get tattoos and stuff and like piercings that I'm just like, okay, like I had a stressful day, failed this, failed that, didn't have like a good day today, so I just do crazy things like that. I would say that it's kind of a mixture of both. It kind of just reminds me of like how to push myself forward in that sense. So it's like a memory for me to be like, I know at this point in time I wanted to be successful, but I kind of like failed, but it still pushes me forward. So I definitely think it's a good coping method for myself. It's just like there for me. I could just go to the mall, whether it's like either going to the mall or just going out for food or something, or like even grocery shopping.
Braden is a third-year philosophy and human rights major who prides himself on his close relationship with his family. Now, this is an important aspect to remember as he recounts his experience during his parents' split up. Here's what he had to say.
To my knowledge, there was no events leading up to it. It just happened one night. They sat us down on the couch and told them that they didn't want to be together anymore and that my dad was moving out. I stayed quiet with tears in my eyes the whole time and wondering how my brother was so okay with it. And then I got up and left and didn't come back for 2 weeks. So. Decided to go on a trip. I was going backpacking in Europe for 2 months, and I was 17 at the time, so I was fairly young to be doing something like that. And it really started making me planning the trip and everything. I was still so angry with my mom. I didn't tell her I got accepted to university. I didn't tell her I was going to Europe. She didn't know anything. She got all the information through my dad. I would say that it had a huge impact on me really having like the courage and the driving force to go. Because like it's a scary thing, for me at least, to do that. So traveling always seems to be a way for people to turn the page, to kind of like do something in between chapters. And so yeah, again, like it's a huge coping mechanism. It's a lot of time for yourself, so it really helps when it comes to helping with dealing with things when you feel like you've lost a part of yourself. It really puts things in perspective in like a really rational way and like a really worldly kind of way. It really shows you what's important, and you miss a lot of things. And you don't miss things when you're angry with people, and I never missed my family or my mom or anything when I wasn't speaking to her. I went 8 months completely fine without talking to her. Like, not an issue. And it was weird that it wasn't an issue for me, but it wasn't. But when you go traveling and you have like, you can't help but miss your family, it kind of shows you that, hey, maybe you miss them for a reason. So. But I mean, it's cliche to travel. I think it's kind of cliche to travel in general, no matter what your reason is. I mean, like, I graduated high school, so I traveled. It's kind of a cliche. My parents split up, so I traveled. It's kind of a cliche. I'm just curious about the world. That's kind of a cliche. So I mean, I don't feel like you can really escape that. I mean, to say it's in society's terms, what might be disingenuous to a lot of people's like really, really genuine feelings about wanting to see what's out there.
Ruth is a second-year international business student at the Sprott School of Business. Ringette has always been a huge part of her life because she's been playing with the same group of girls her entire life. She tells us about the traumatic experience of losing a teammate and how it impacted her consumption behaviors. Let's take a look.
We've known each other since we were like 7, I think. Yeah, and she kind of passed away in a pretty tragic way. She like got hit in a rugby game, and then she went into a coma, and then she donated all her organs to science and like to other people. So I think I reacted how anybody would react, just because no one really expected it. So yeah, I was pretty emotional, because like I had never lost anybody like that before. So it was definitely a big emotional event in my life. For us, it's definitely a different kind of dynamic when you've played together for so long. So we got together, we made a card for her family. One of my friends started selling bracelets, which raised money for organ donation awareness. And we got together before the funeral just so we could be together, because nobody really understands except for the people that was on that team. So yeah. We all definitely grieved in different ways. I think I was probably one of the most silent and held back. For me, the way I got over it was I spoke at her funeral, which I felt was I needed to do and represent my friends and my team, and like all the things that we went through during our like teenager years, which I felt was super important to all of us. So for me, it was speaking at the funeral. For other people, it was just kind of being there and being able to talk to her parents and things like that. It was definitely, now that I think about it, I've never actually thought about it, but it was definitely how much food can I eat? It was like, okay, I want to go get food here with you, and I want to go get food here over there with you, and it was definitely, I needed to do as much not in my house by myself as I could. Before, it used to be like maybe once every 2 weeks and stuff, but definitely towards, like right after my friend's passing, it was like once a week, twice a week. For me it was, yeah, just because I'm overthinker. So if I'm alone, it just becomes too much of an obsessional habit to think. So for me, it was definitely a way to get away from all of it. Not really, no.
It was pretty effective.
Yeah, I think it was fine for me. It worked well for me, I guess, yeah.
The interviews provided us with solid groundwork to begin our research. But to dive deeper, we handed out 65 surveys to random students on campus. Here are our results. Of the sample that was surveyed, 57% of respondents said that their consumption behavior was impacted by one of the 4 traumatic events described earlier. Of this group of respondents, 67% were female, while 33% were male. Most of the respondents, about 43%, cited losing a loved one as a traumatic event. 30% selected going through a breakup, and 27% selected failing a test or exam. There were no respondents that cited losing a job as the driving force behind the change in consumption behavior. All respondents viewed these events with different levels of significance in their lives. In general, however, we found that on a scale of 1 to 5, those who had failed a test or exam ranked this event at a level of significance at 2 or 3. Those who had gone through a breakup ranked this event at a significance level of 3 or 4. And those who had lost a loved one ranked this event at a significance level of 4 or 5. Despite the significance level of the event, we were unable to find a correlation between the rating the respondents gave to the event and the resulting consumption behavior. However, we were able to determine that the most common consumption behaviors for respondents in our sample were clothing, going out to eat, and alcohol and drugs. In the short term, 84% of respondents reported that their purchases left them feeling the same or somewhat better. In the long term, however, 92% of respondents reported that their purchases helped them feel better or left them very satisfied. As is consistent with existing research, patterns between respondents are hard to identify. Each case is largely situational and therefore cannot be applied as a general rule. The second portion of our hypothesis assumes that gender differences play a large role in consumption. Not only was this disproven, but there also are little to no differences between male and female consumption habits. Now this is interesting because society paints males as relatively unemotional in stressful situations, but their consumption habits prove otherwise. We also found that being students had little impact on the amount of money that respondents spent to repair their mood. Existing literature suggests that traumatic events cause people to focus only on short-term needs, which explains why students spend a lot of money in spite of their current financial situation. Arguably, the most surprising aspect of the entire research process was how happy people were with the consumption choices that they made. Even in the long run, respondents reported feelings of satisfaction and indicated that they would repeat the purchase in the future. Our in-depth interviews and survey results are very consistent with existing literature. Each case is as unique as the individual, but it appears that consumption of any kind aids in the coping process. So it seems that in many cases, consumption really does heal all wounds.